Good day, everyone, and welcome to our 26th EMFNet webinar. It's really my pleasure to be facilitating today's session. My name is Randa Saad, and today we will be discussing tobacco, the epidemic, the industry, and the importance of media. We have two speakers with us today who, in addition to being wonderful colleagues, are experts in their fields. And they will be discussing with us today the strategies, or more appropriately, the devious tactics that are employed by the tobacco industry in undermining tobacco control measures. And they will also be discussing the importance of mass media campaigns in this fight against the epidemic, especially in changing the norms and behaviors that are related to tobacco. Now, each speaker will have around 20 minutes, and I kindly ask all our attendees and participants to post your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. And I promise you, I will do my best to attend to all questions in the last half an hour of our webinar. Without further ado, I am delighted to introduce our first speaker, who is our own Dr. Yusuf Khadir. Dr. Yusuf is the director of the Center of Excellence for Applied Epidemiology at GHD EMFNet. He is also a professor of epidemiology and biostatistics at the Faculty of Medicine in Jordan University of Science and Technology. Dr. Yusuf holds multiple degrees, and it will take time to list them. Mainly they're in public health, epidemiology, and biostatistics, and he is a fellow of the Faculty of Public Health of the Royal College of Physicians of the United Kingdom through distinction. He has received multiple awards for his work and has published more than 650 scientific papers in reputable journals. And most recently, he contributed to the development of a casebook titled Big Tobacco's Dirty Tricks. Dr. Yusuf will be discussing the tactics of the tobacco industry with us. So please, Dr. Yusuf, go ahead.
Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. Thanks, Dr. Randa, for this introduction. Yeah, I'd like to speak about the big tobacco's dirty tricks and tobacco industry tactics. The WHO report in the global tobacco epidemic in 2019 showed that 2.6 billion people live in countries without even one tobacco control policy implemented at the recommended scale. WHO cites tobacco industry interference as a main barrier for progress. The global tobacco market is really huge. In 2021, the global tobacco market was valued at 850 billion US dollars. And this is expected to increase by an additional $38 billion in 2025. In USA, just as an example, the tobacco market valued at 76 billion in 2021, and it's growing over time. As it's clearly seen in USA and as well as all countries, the tobacco industry is growing despite losing almost 8 million consumers who are lost due to tobacco-related causes. Since its inception, the tobacco industry has been at forefront of interfering public opinion and disrupting tobacco control policy using sophisticated and deceptive methods. The sphere of influence of this multi-billion investment or industry reaches to education, law, media, and scientific research. tobacco industry interference can come in many and various ways. Even in global pandemic, when COVID-19, when it was established that smoking is a major risk factor for severe COVID-19 illness, tobacco companies continued producing, distributing, and selling their products. They were adding fuel to the fire. There are different tactics used by tobacco industry. One of the main strategy they use is advertising, promotion, and the sponsorship. In 2019, the big tobacco companies spent almost $8.6 billion in USA alone on advertising for their products. But nowadays, and because of advertising become more restricted or banned in some countries, tobacco companies keep searching for loopholes and increase expenditure in less regulated areas and domains. They always find the creative ways to adapt to tobacco control measures. Nowadays, they are using digital and social media advertising to reach children and adolescents. They want to compensate for the 8 million losses of the consumers who died because of tobacco. Almost more than 100 hashtags associated with tobacco companies have been viewed more than 25 billion times around the world between 2007 and 2016. So I'm going to present tactics, and also I'd like to suggest some recommendations. To face this tactic, governments need to implement strict and extensive bans in all forms of marketing. And also, public health actors need to establish counter-marketing strategies such as mass media campaigns. And this is what Infinite has done this year, actually. Infinite partners with CDC, Vital Strategy, WHO, Ministers of Health, and other partners in the region to implement a large-scale mass media campaign in 4 countries: Jordan, Palestine, Iraq, and Egypt. And because of this big success of this campaign, United Against Tobacco and COVID-19, متحدون ضد التبغ والكوفيد, based on this big success, now Infinite also planning to upscale, to expand its efforts in this area. Another strategy or recommendation is that, according to FCTC, countries need to introduce health warnings on the distributed packages, because attractive package design is one of the most important weapons used by tobacco companies to distract consumers and policymakers from the harms of tobacco products. The second tactic, front groups. Tobacco industry front groups are coalitions that are created and or funded by tobacco companies to represent a particular agenda that is aligned with the interests of tobacco companies. Usually their ties to the industry are hidden or minimized because they want to create the illusion of public sympathy for certain issues like deregulation of the industry. Remember, appearance may be deceptive. What do we recommend? There are several recommendations to face this tactic, but when reading research or information, data, or any opinion that appears suspicious, check carefully for conflict of interests. Look at the hidden ties and agenda related to the industry and report this concern to the relevant public health authorities in your countries. Basically, there are some websites that list these front groups. They disclose their identity. They expose them actually in these web sites. As you see here, we need to spot a wolf in sheep's clothing. We need to expose this industry when it comes to front groups. Manipulating the media. For long decades, tobacco companies are manipulating or used to manipulate the media by sponsoring journalists, by using corporate social responsibility as an alternative way to get media attention, to generate publicity, and to attract consumer to the brand. And also they are using social media influencers to manipulate the media. Just as an example, in June 2020, Japan Tobacco International, it's a big company, donated $300,000 to healthcare facilities in Zambia and the schools in Zambia to help fight COVID-19 pandemic. They want to show that they prioritize social goals over profits. They want to present, a different face, in this area. Another recommendation for facing this tactic is education and advocacy. As one example, for World No Tobacco Day in 2020, WHO launched a school toolkit that focused on protecting children and adolescents from this industry. They utilize social media and they welcomed online partners to amplify messaging. They called on all sectors to help stop marketing tactics of tobacco and related industry that prey on children and adolescents. As I mentioned before, mass media campaigns are really effective to inform the public, change behaviors, and ultimately reduce the smoking prevalence in the countries. But for the mass media campaigns to be effective, they must reach more than 75% of their target audience and last for longer period, 18 to 24 months, if the mass media campaigns want to affect behaviors. The mass media campaign should also, to be effective, should also consider emotional messages and intense images and sounds and the graphic of negative health consequences. This is to be more effective. And we have Dr. Rebecca with us from Vital Strategy. She is the expert in the area. Funding scientific research. I read many research articles where tobacco companies manipulated the data or misinterpreted the findings of research. They are, since decades, tobacco companies spent huge money to shift the blame of illness like lung cancer, cardiovascular disease to other causes. They kept and continuing funding scientists and researchers to conduct research and publish favorable outcomes, such as what we see nowadays about harm reduction alternatives like e-cigarettes. They really misleading consumers and policymakers about the health consequences of vaping. And they want to show to policymakers that the industry is committed to better health outcomes for smokers. This is very interesting meta-analysis, which I read in 2019. It's a meta-analysis of 94 studies found a strong association between industry-related conflict of interest and industry favorable result relating to e-cigarettes. Whenever there is a conflict of interest related to industry, there is a favorable findings related to e-cigarettes. 95% of studies in this meta-analysis showed that, or 95% of the studies with no industry conflict of interest found potential harm caused by e-cigarettes. So it causes harm, e-cigarettes, compared to just 7.7% of the studies that were funded by the tobacco industry. The tobacco companies don't want us to see the findings. They don't tell the whole truth, as mentioned by in this paper. What are recommendations? We know that conflict of interest are mandated in academic journals, but sometimes there is low compliance with this, where the tobacco industry has been involved in the research. So there is a need for more substantial restrictions on industry involvement in research. And academic journals should implement strict policies which don't allow them to publish their research, or don't publish any research with tobacco industry funding. And this has been used by some journals like Tobacco Control and PLOS Medicine. Political lobbying is another tactic used by industry. They always seeking to find ways to directly or indirectly lobby policymakers and decision makers to interfere with tobacco control strategies. Usually such lobbying includes financial donations to political parties or candidates so that they will support policies sympathetic to the industry. So what can be done to face this tactic? Civil society and public health actors need to investigate, report, and expose examples of lobbying by the tobacco industry when they exist. Also, governments must prevent tobacco industry interference in policy making. We're still seeing the lobbying in many countries of the region. Some practical actions that the government can use is mandating disclosure of all interaction with tobacco industry, rejecting all offers of assistance from the industry, and banning all industry financial contribution to political parties. This is another tactic, electronic alternatives as harm reduction. Nowadays we see that tobacco companies promote e-cigarettes as a reduced risk, smoke-free, socially acceptable product. They want to present themselves as champions of harm reduction, striving to help the smoker to quit cigarettes and transition to safer versions. Usually tobacco companies target high-income countries with harm reduction approaches, because in low and middle-income countries, things is much easier. Selling tobacco is much easier with less strict and less regulated tobacco control strategies. How to face this? By introducing legislations that has been used successfully, to ban cigarettes, such as restriction on advertising, taxation, display bans at point of sales, prohibiting vaping in workplaces, and other measures that prove to be effective. But they should do this very quickly without any delay. Now we see that 40 countries have banned the distribution and sale of e-cigarettes completely. Other countries have applied different policy restrictions to regulate the e-cigarette market. Legal challenges. Again, for decades, they are really using legal challenges to extensively to question the validity behind the science of tobacco's harmful health ethics. They know that they will not win the legal battles, but they are doing this to promote doubt in the minds of policymakers and consumers, and also to hinder and delay progress in tobacco control. How we face this? Fighting fair with fair, by taking legal actions against big tobacco industry companies. This is what happened in 2016 when the court ordered 5 tobacco companies to pay a total of $206 billion to the US governments because of the adverse health ethics of smoking and because of addictiveness of cigarettes. They are using other tricks at the point of sale. As you frequently see, vendors near schools are frequently paid to display tobacco products in their retail shops, along with the sleek point of sale display boards, attractive marketing materials, colorful cases to attract children and adolescents. They want new consumers. They'd like to attract new consumers. Even they advertise the products, tobacco products, at eye level of children. The bad thing they do actually is that what is called single stick cigarettes. They encourage the sale of cigarettes individually or in small buckets to increase the affordability and accessibility of tobacco products in school children. There are other strategies to counter the activities of the tobacco industry. The tobacco control sector should get to know the local tobacco industry by analyzing their documents and their news. Countries need to monitor the local tobacco industry carefully. They should inform and involve also public. They need to use champions to tell the truth about tobacco use. Obtaining and using evidence in a strategic way. Learn from international experiences and lessons. Exposing the myth and refuting the industry argument. It's important to build strong anti-smoking coalitions to face the frontal groups. We need to communicate and strictly enforce tobacco control measures. The most important is to make the industry accountable by also regulating the industry. These are some tactics, 7 or 8 tactics that actually presented in a book, case book, Big Tobacco's Dirty Tricks. I will share with you this book. This is really very interesting. And I'd like to thank all contributors like Dr. John Gonan. He's the lead editor for this case book. And I'm really proud actually to represent Infinite in this important work. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Youssef. This has been very enlightening indeed. Unfortunately, as the international tobacco control interventions gain traction, the industry is maneuvering its brands and products to navigate around tobacco control measures and restrictions. And what's devastating is that it's doing that to attract new users, specifically youth, and this is worrisome. And we thank you for publishing these tactics, which give us hope in the fight against the tobacco industry. I would like to give some information before we proceed to our next speaker about some key facts with regards to tobacco. So tobacco is a risk factor for most non-communicable diseases. And in the region, more than 2.8 million die from NCDs. 1 out of 6 people in the region will die from NCDs. And tobacco kills half of its users. It kills more than 8 million people each year around the globe. More than 7 million of those are a direct result of direct tobacco use. However, around 1.2 million are the result of being exposed to secondhand smoking. And over 80% of the world's 1.3 billion tobacco users live in low and middle income countries, such as a large majority of the countries in our region. So this is just to give some context to the extent of the problem. And with this, I will go to my next speaker. It's really a pleasure for me to introduce Rebecca Pearl. Ms. Pearl is the Vice President of Partnerships and Engagement at Vital Strategies. Her work includes guiding and overseeing the organization's work at the United Nations in New York and the WHO in Geneva on public health issues, including NCDs and its causes. She also directs the Bloomberg initiatives to reduce tobacco use by advising governments and NGOs and directing communication strategies and media campaigns in 10 priority countries, including China and India. Her public health experience comes from 2 decades as a science journalist. Most notably, she spent 7 years covering tobacco as a science correspondent for National Public Radio in Washington, D.C. And she won for that the coveted Peabody Award for her investigative reporting. I personally had the pleasure of working with Rebecca for the past 1.5 years as we collaborated on the United Against Tobacco and COVID regional campaign. And I can tell you, I have learned so much on media and communication when it comes to tobacco from her. Please, Rebecca, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rhonda. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Just before I go into my presentation, I want to say thank you also to Dr. Youssef and for his presentation. And I see that there's many questions in the chat, like 12 questions, and I will try to answer some of these that relate to my presentation, and we'll come back to the others. Yes, I hope we have time to do that because I see there's questions. So I hope to answer some of those here, and then we'll come back. Thank you. So what I want to speak about today is the dynamic landscape that is the media. And one of the reasons for this is exactly what Dr. Youssef was talking about. The tobacco industry has so many tricks, and among their tricks, they are often the first at new media, and we need to keep up with them. So I'm going to try to concentrate on that, this importance of new media. So thank you. I'll take the next slide, please. Next slide. Have we gotten there? Yes. Okay. So as I started to say, our world, the tobacco industry is constantly changing. The world has become more complex and more digitally focused as audiences, communication channels, and the industry itself has changed. So we as public health officials, we have to figure out the ways that we can get ahead of this. Next slide, please. So Vital Strategies, where I work, has been working in tobacco control since 2007 as part of the Bloomberg Initiative to reduce tobacco use. Vital has produced and supported nearly 375 media campaigns across across 44 countries in this endeavor. And most recently, we've been working, as Rhonda said, on some of the countries in the Eastern Mediterranean region. Next slide, please. So this was one of the questions I noticed in the chat. Media campaigns do require a significant outlay of resources. There's no doubt, and a significant amount of effort and time. But considerable evidence does show that they are cost effective. Analysis of campaigns in 3 countries that we've done indicate that campaign awareness was associated with increased quit attempts among tobacco users and with associated per person costs per quit attempt. In the US, 7 cents, in India, 21 cents, and in China, 21 cents in China, 56 cents in Vietnam, and 7 cents in India. So there really is qualitative data about how using this money for campaigns can result in quits, very specifically. Thanks. Next slide, please. So a little bit about our work in tobacco control. What Vital Strategies does is we use the WHO Empower technical package as our guide. This is a policy guide for tobacco control, and we focus on evidence-based policy efforts for our campaigns. That's not only encouraging cessation, but also supporting increasing taxes, TAPS bans, which are marketing bans, smoke-free places on what we call 100% smoke-free, so there's no smoking in any public places, and strengthening pack warnings, which was another question I noticed in the chat. Pack warnings are a really important communication channel because smokers take them out of their pockets in most parts of the world, an average of 14 times a day. And so if you can have strong warnings on those packages, that serves as a really important communication tool. Think of the child sitting with his father and looking at that pack. All our work is under the theory that knowledge encourages change, that messages and themes can often be repackaged and adapted for multiple countries as long as they're culturally appropriate. Our work has contributed to national comprehensive tobacco control wins, most recently in Mexico and Ukraine last year in 2021. Also, to larger and more hard-hitting warnings on tobacco packs, as mentioned, and e-cigarette and on e-cigarettes as well. We've done work to marketing bans in Indonesia and Mexico. We've worked to reduce the prevalence of tobacco in India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. And perhaps most importantly, to raise taxes, which is the single most important thing you can do to reduce tobacco use in India, Turkey, Philippines, and Indonesia. If I could have the next slide, please. So in our early work, the purpose was to get governments to invest and to run campaigns, to ensure campaign content is effective, and to build evidence for these campaigns, particularly in low and middle income countries where there was little. And finally, to scale up government investments for sustainable mechanisms so campaigns, as Dr. Youssef mentioned, can continue to run because one campaign is not going to solve your problem. So that was how we got started. Next slide, please. Another early area of success that we still use were testimonials. These are stories of real people and how they are harmed by tobacco, and they are effective and persuasive on TV, and they're also shared on social media and other digital media, and they attract attention. So in this, what you're seeing here is using an ad, yes, on television, also in social media, and also bringing the actual testimonial the actual person who suffered from tobacco to a press conference. So you can use this work in multiple ways. Can you show this? If you could show this PSA here, I want to say this video. This video is called Ike, and it is, as I mentioned, the story of one woman and her, what she experienced with tobacco. And I'd just like to play it for you. Thank you. Right, so I just want to say that this video has been so powerful that even though this woman is a Muslim woman from Indonesia, people from other countries have used this ad because it really resonated with them, despite the cultural differences. So it shows the real power of this campaign. Next slide, please. So we also seek and have always worked to build a base of evidence to illustrate that campaigns are effective and worthwhile, not only in high-income countries where they've been used for years, but also in these low and middle-income countries. So we've looked at, for instance, issues which I'm going to come back to in China related to a practice of giving cigarettes as gifts on holidays. We've looked at testimonials across places, and we've added to the scientific evidence with some 25 plus peer-reviewed papers and reports. Next slide, please. So this is a case study of how you select the media you're going to use for a campaign. So I just want to take you through this. Vital strategies in coordination with our BI partners and partners in Brazil at what's called the Tobacco Control Alliance, or ACT, developed a campaign that specifically targeted judicial officials who had the power to make a final decision about flavors and additives in tobacco products in the capital of Brazil, with messages about how flavors are attractive to youth. What these posters say is, it starts with strawberry and ends with cancer, and it starts with mint and ends with emphysema. So these particular posters were placed in strategic locations around Brasilica, near these main judicial buildings where we know the courts were making a decision about whether flavors should be used. And in August of that same year, combined with advocacy efforts among NGOs, and the Constitutional Court struck down this provisional measure, saying that governments did have the authority to regulate flavors and prohibiting the sale of flavors once and for all in the courts. And this wouldn't have happened if, or as part of an effort, we hadn't ensured that the judiciaries who were going to make this decision saw these materials. So this is to say, you really have to be very thoughtful about your target audience. Next slide, please. So how do you choose your medium, right? There's so many out there, and there are more choices than ever now. And the landscape is, as I mentioned, more complex. So yes, people know more about tobacco control today, maybe than they did a decade ago, but the industry, as you saw in Dr. Yosef's PowerPoint and deck, has become even more tricky, and so has the media landscape. So now you've got content and digital delivery, you've got video and TV and radio, you've got consumers demanding a pipeline of fresh content on social media, and you've got influencers and product placement. And you have to think about all these things when selecting your mediums. Next slide, please. So here is our theory of change, which was also something I noticed was a question in the chat. Where we used to think of just traditional videos of PSAs or TV, now we really need to think about digital advertising, earned media, social media, influencer mobilizations, search optimization, and mobile resources on everything that comes to you on your phone, right? And on WhatsApp and WeChat and what's on YouTube. So all of these things are part of creating a theory of change. And our theory of change is this: that campaigns bring attention, they challenge behavior and norms, they also lead to discussion on social networks, and they ideally change policy, or they certainly soften the ground for policy change, which we have shown time and again. And they need to be kept, as Dr. Yusuf said, front of mind, because one campaign is not going to solve your problem. Next slide, please. So I want to show you another video here that addresses not only tobacco issues, but the new products, as Dr. Yusuf explained, about e-cigarettes and how those products are used by young people. So you have to be on the digital platforms where these young people are to get these messages to them. So I want to show you this video if we could.
Раніше нам казали, що сигарети – це круто, що вони приємні на смак та не такі вже й шкідливі. Але з часом ми дізналися правду. Зараз нам говорять, що електронні пристрої для куріння – це круто, що вони приємні на смак та менш шкідливі. Але міжнародні дослідження довели, що нікотин і токсини, які є в цих виробах, викликають залежність і можуть спричинити рак та хвороби легень. Вимагаємо заборонити рекламу цих пристроїв і продаж їх неповнолітнім, а також захистити людей від шкідливого вторинного диму. Всі електронні пристрої для куріння потрібно законодавчо врегулювати так само, як сигарети.
So this campaign was for Ukraine, and in fact, Ukraine, despite the fact there's a war there, as you know, recently regulated e-cigarettes in the same way that cigarettes are regulated, so they can't be used in public places, because using them in those places, allowing them in those places, and it's the same, by the way, with hookah and water pipes, just normalizes the use of tobacco, which we don't want. Next slide, please.
Раніше
So again, new channels and new formats. So we created for China, for working with the CDC and the government there, we supported the development and launch of this new this campaign called Anti-Cigarette Gift Giving Campaign. This is a campaign we have leaned into for a long time, and this campaign is designed to actively discourage the practice of giving cigarettes as gifts in China to family and friends around the new year. And what we did here is we took an old video and we updated it with gamified version on 7 different platforms, including WEBi, which is sort of their equivalent of YouTube in China. And with this gamified version, it really was attractive to young people, and there were more than 9 million views to this this campaign. And it's kind of a funny one where the woman stands up to the man and tells him why they shouldn't give cigarettes as gifts. So next slide, please. So here's another example of using new digital campaigns. This is a testimonial of a man named Sutupo, who is from Indonesia. And he was a very beloved man because he ran the state disaster relief agency. So he was a prominent figure, an influencer, who brought calm during Indonesia's many national disasters over the years. Unfortunately, he was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. Well, Vital Strategies, my organization, we met him and we made a video in which he speaks of getting his disease from secondhand smoke exposure. He passed away in July of 2019, several months after the interview, and Vital supported a social media campaign that was posted an edited interview on the day of his passing, telling his feelings and thoughts about dying from secondhand smoke or being sick from secondhand smoke. And more than 3 million people viewed the video in just days across social media platforms, and it received much earned media coverage too. So PR is another one of the things you want to think about when doing these campaigns. Next slide, please. So now I would like to talk a little bit about some of our resources that we have available. The first one being Media Beacon, which you can see at mediabeacon.org. This is a website that includes many of our media materials. All of these materials have been carefully pre-tested and evaluated for effect. These resources are set up to be easily licensable, easily adaptable, and free to use. And we now have materials available in more than 8 languages. This puts evaluated materials, in the hands of government, so they don't need to reinvent the wheel and create their own. They can adapt materials that we already know work. And this is something we did with the project we've recently been working on with Dr. Yusuf and Rhonda in the EMRA region. So because creating new materials can really take up a lot of valuable resources. So when you can adapt, it's really a smart idea. And we've also created specific libraries like this one for some ministries, including in Russia and Ukraine. And we're working on something currently for the EMRO region. Next slide, please. So another thing that's really important, because campaigns are expensive to get them out in front of the public, and because you need to do them more than once, you really need to have a sustainable mechanism to run campaigns on social media, on digital screens, on television. And this report from Vital details 4 primary policies and funding options that governments use to sustain media campaigns. So for example, in Turkey, they have a mechanism whereby the television stations must give, for public service announcements, 30 minutes of prime time television every month, and additionally 60 minutes of non-prime time. In this way, you can always keep campaigns running. You can always keep these messages in the front of the public's imagination. You have a mechanism to do it. Another thing we've done is we've really partnered with governments for them to step up and help to pay for these campaigns. And in 2021, governments contributed to mass media campaigns up to $34 million to help support these campaigns. So partnering is critical too. Next slide, please. Here is another, this is another resource that we offer. We have a anti-industry piece of our work called exposedtobacco.org, or STOP. And this is one of the campaigns from that, our Burned by Tobacco campaign in coordination with WHO, and last year's World No Tobacco Day theme targeted people who are interested in environmental and climate issues. And this really grew our movement, and it was a hit with a relatively low media spend that resulted in very high interest measured in traffic to the site and engagement. And for instance, some 2.6 billion people were potentially reached through this tobacco exposed hashtag, along with World No Tobacco Day, World No Tobacco Day content, and in these top 5 countries in particular. I really love this graphic on the bottom here. You'll see the earth and half cigarette butts. So we really hit a nerve with people who care about environment and smoking. So I think our research shows that second to harms to people, harms to the environment related to cigarettes is also a message that really resonates, and one we want to lean into. Another resource we have is the Tobacco Atlas, which you can see at tobaccoatlas.org. This is really a beautiful go-to resource with chapters on many areas of concern and import from tobacco control. And we have plans for additional chapters and features still coming, including a new chapter on water pipes and regulating novel products, and a costing tool for tobacco taxes. There's country fact sheets as well. So I invite you to look at tobaccoatlas.org, and we'll hope to include that in our web materials for EMRO. Next slide, please. So in sum, it's critical to stay relevant. It's critical to stay on top of the tobacco industry and their tricks. This work requires more than just putting a video on television. It requires commitments from governments and partnerships. It requires knowledge of social, digital platforms. It requires online champions, influencers who will speak to these issues and really effectively drive millions of people to be interested and to be involved. And it includes continuous capacity building and technical assistance. Next slide, please. So finally, I want to share with you a video that we used in the campaign we've been talking to you about, which is the new one we're doing in EMRO, in 4 countries in EMRO, in Iraq, in Egypt, in Palestine, and in Jordan. And this was kind of one of the materials from the campaign that we really were quite proud of. And it was used again on digital videos. It was used to launch a PR campaign. It was used for interview purposes to get more attention from the media. It was used on radio in certain countries, and on television. So I'd like to show you this one too. Can we move to echo? Thank you.
تعرفي أنا ما بقدر أشرب قهوة الصبح بدون سيجارة. ما بقدر أشرب مي بدون مساعدة.
أنا بس بأرجع لما أطلع مع صحباتي.
أنا صار لي زمان مش قادر أطلع من البيت.
أنا ما بدي أترك الدخان.
ما بدي بابا يتركنا.
للأسف ما بقدر أترك الدخان.
للأسف ما بنقدر نعمل شيء.
لسه ما فات الوقت. راجعوا عيادات الإقلاع عن التدخين والتبغ التابعة لوزارة الصحة. corona.jo/quit smoking.
Rhonda, did it work for people? Were I couldn't tell, the subtitles looked off. Did that?
Yes.
Okay, you could see it all, and okay.
Yes.
All right,
Yeah.
so thank you. So just to just make my point one more time, campaigns like this, they need to run more than once. They need to run across multiple channels, and they need to be backed up with influencers and with media interest and with PR and on video, on digital media, and keeping them. One of the things we did with this campaign is we cut very short pieces out of it. Like you see there's this sort of echo, I can't do this, I can't do that. And we use just the 10-second snippets on social media too, as a way to keep this front and center of people's minds and see it all around. You want posters, ideally, you want videos, and you want digital engagement. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Rebecca, for presenting the wonderful work that you and Vital Strategies have been doing around the world. And of course, for the collaboration that we had together and continue to have on the United Against Tobacco and COVID campaign. And though media campaigns are a critical tool for tobacco control and often cost effective, unfortunately, they are usually underutilized globally. And we at AMFNet with the belief that sustained and large-scale media campaigns are effective in driving our communities, at least, to quit smoking and preventing our youth to initiate smoking and helping shift social norms away from accepting tobacco use, and also in building an environment that is conducive to policy change. As you said, we will be launching a website which will house multiple tested messages and campaigns, campaign videos, and radio messages and posters, etc., that have been used in the region, specifically in 4 countries in the region. And this material will be available for anyone who is interested to propagate the message and propagate the campaign further in your region, in your countries, or wherever you would like. And hopefully we will be sharing this website as soon as it is finalized with everyone. And with that, we have our third speaker, Dr. Fatima. Welcome. I know, I love the sign behind you. Such an effective message. This goes back to the effect of media and visual aid. And Dr. Fatima, I'll just go ahead and introduce you, Dr. Fatima. I'm really delighted that you were able to attend. Dr. Fatima Al-Awa is the Regional Advisor for the Tobacco Free Initiative at WHO AMRO, which is a WHO priority program that aims to reduce the global burden of tobacco. Dr. Fatima holds a PhD in comparative law and arbitration and thus provides the needed legal technical support for countries in advancing their tobacco control legislation, policies, and strategies. She also coordinates between the region and other international partners on tobacco control activities and has authored a number of publications in support of tobacco control in the region. Dr. Fatima, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Randa, and I am sorry that I attended late. It is a combination of the calendar showing me at 5, while you started a little bit earlier than 5, and also a connection problem. So thank you very much for having me in this webinar. And in my presentation, I will be talking about tobacco epidemic and the industry in the region. I know that my colleague, Dr. Yusuf Khadr, will be speaking more in depth about the tobacco industry. So let us navigate through the presentation. The presentation is focusing on the NCG agenda and tobacco epidemic, key facts about tobacco epidemic, status of tobacco control in the region, COVID, a key lesson, countering the industry, how can we do that, and what is needed now in the region in terms of escalating tobacco control efforts and agenda. In the region, more than 2.8 million die from NCDs. 1 of 6 people will die from NCDs, and on the pie chart at the right-hand side, you can see that most of this is attributed to diseases related to tobacco use. We have key facts that are controlling our agenda and paving the way for how we need to move forward. Tobacco kills half of its users. Tobacco kills more than 8 million people each year. More than 7 million deaths are a result of direct tobacco use, while 1.2 is a result of secondhand smoke, and most of the smokers are in the middle income and low income countries. Most of our countries are like this. We have 19 countries parties to the WHO FCTC. That means that they are committed to the legal commitment in the WHO FCTC, and they need to implement it ASAP. In the FCTC, I would like to highlight in particular 5.3, Article 5.3, which is an article that we don't see in other international treaties. And this is about protecting public health policies and tobacco control policies from the interference of the tobacco industry. The message of 5.3 is that we are all committed to control tobacco and to protect tobacco control interests. There are 2 elements that are controlling the tobacco epidemic. This is the tobacco control efforts and the tobacco industry efforts. That can be impacted on 2 things: the prevalence and the policy status in different countries of the region. The policies and the prevalence are a direct result of how these 2 powers are interacting and who is moving faster than the other, who is stronger than the other. When we look at the policy status in the region, we see that a lot of development has happened from the year 2008, when we started collecting data. This is what we call the traffic light table. Green means highest achieving country, yellow means in the middle, and red means very poor achievement or policy at risk. So you can see that we moved from 19 green in 2008 to 39 in 2021. From 67 yellows to 55, reduced to probably green, and in the red from 45 cells to 37 cells. So there is a development, but there are 3 signs controlling the policy development, and you don't see that in any other region. First, most of the colors, as you can see, is in the yellow zone. The yellow zone, I call it the comfort zone, where we do changes in the policies, but they are not strong enough to affect and impact the prevalence. The second symptom that we see in the policies in the region, that some countries are on the highest level today, but tomorrow they withdraw and they go back in the policies. This is something that we don't see in any other country. So for example, a country that bans tobacco in all public places, suddenly the country next year will allow designated smoking areas. So this is another sign that is preventing our real progress in the policies of tobacco control. The third symptom is the lack of comprehensive approach. So, for example, you see in many countries mixture of colors, green, red, yellow. While if we are talking about impactful policies, we need to see in one country all the cells or the majority of cells green. So that will show us that there is an impact on the tobacco control prevalence and end. When we look at the prevalence, and this is the second element of how the tobacco control and the tobacco industry, two elements interact against each other. We see that we have shocking numbers in the region. For example, in Jordan, 65% of Jordanian males do smoke. Other countries are around 40 something, nearly 50. And the new numbers coming after COVID-19, for example, from West Bank is 67 among men. This is not yet published data, but we are in the process of analyzing it. But the numbers are really becoming very shocking, especially among males and among younger generation, as we see here now. As you can see, we have also very high prevalence among youth 13 to 15 years old. And the difference between this one and the one before is that when you look at the females, the yellow bars, they are much higher than those of the adults, female. So younger females smoke more than those of the adults. When we look at the trends and what we are expecting for the region, in the first two trend reports, the expectation for the region was to increase. But in 2019 and 2020, the region was decreasing with every other region of WHO. However, this decrease, I call it very fragile decrease, because any high prevalence number that comes from any country will impact this, and we will see the decrease turning into an increase. We need to work all of us together to stop this. Definitely, one of the key elements that are impacting this high prevalence in the region is the tobacco industry interference. That is a fact in the region. We have seen this in the Eastern Mediterranean region industry interference index, published 2021 by the STOP initiative, the global initiative, and they include 8 EMRO countries, and you can see the score of the country in front of you from very high to low. But definitely that shows that there is a tobacco industry interference existing very strongly in the region. The only way to control this is through the continued monitoring of the industry and its activities, creation of observatories, and we have one regional observatory in Egypt. We do hope that other countries will host more observatories to continue to monitor the tobacco industry activities. Also, sharing of the information with everybody, including decision makers. Otherwise, we will not see a change in that. Definitely, the biggest challenge in the region is the tobacco industry and its activities, what is called national or national monopolies. In addition, of course, of course, the multinational industry and what they do to promote their products and to promote the new products that are coming to the market. How do they see the region? I think this very old, and not very old, but it is coming from the year, I think, 2013. And this is a statement, and I put the link so that if whoever wants to access this, they can go and see it. They see our region as not being immune from tobacco control efforts, but they feel that the Middle East remains a region with a strong tobacco culture, both for cigarette smoking and pipe tobacco used in shisha, water pipe, and the effort of the Arab Spring will certainly have been to put smoking control regulations on the back burner, on the shelf, basically. So this is how they see our region. The only way to control is through this example from Saudi Arabia, where a circular was issued from the Saudi Food and Drug Authority to prevent dealing with the tobacco industry and coordinating tobacco control policies with the tobacco industry. I think this is a great example, without which this wouldn't have happened. This is the plain packaging example that happened in Saudi Arabia, one of the greatest successes of the region, and this would not have happened without implementing 5.3 through the circular that I shared earlier. Definitely, there are lessons learned from the challenges that we face. One of the challenges that we face, of course, is the the COVID-19 pandemic. And despite having a big challenge throughout the world, the region managed to ban tobacco water pipe use in 17 countries. It was implemented very strongly, and I am sharing with you press clippings from different newspapers from different countries where they say لا يوجد أراجيل الشيشة في زمن الكورونا الدخان ممنوع. Succeeding in banning water pipe use in public places during the COVID time means that there is nothing impossible. When there is a political will, tobacco control moves forward. What do we need now in this region? I think we can summarize in 4 main actions. Hold them accountable. Hold the tobacco industry always accountable. Apply 5.3 by its different elements to make sure that they don't have access to public policies and to manipulating public policies. We need to guard the interests of the health agenda from the tobacco industry and from their activities. When they, as you can see in the example in front of you, donate 3 million pounds to a cancer institution, how can doctors in that institution and in other similar institutions support tobacco control while they are getting donations from the tobacco industry, direct donations like this from the tobacco industry? We need at this time where there is a very big economic political crisis in many countries of the region to be innovative, to look at new partnerships, to look at methods and means that we didn't use before, like litigation, how to utilize social media and influencers in the best way that would impact our efforts. And finally, we need to continue to improve the policies, increase tobacco taxation on all tobacco products. That means heated, that means electronic cigarette, nicotine, and tobacco products. Smoke-free policies should be implemented, not only adopted. Graphic health warnings. If you have adopted graphic health warnings and it is not impacting the public as it should be, move to plain packaging. Of course, banning advertising, promotion, and sponsorship. I think these are the four areas that we need to see now developing in the region for better tobacco control and for success stories in tobacco control. The one thing that I would like to conclude with is that the tobacco control movement is not going to stop. It is non-stoppable, and it will move forward regardless of any challenges that we are seeing now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Fatima. As you said, the scale of the epidemic demands our continued attention and support. And I love the statement, hold them accountable. This is very important. We have some 20 minutes left to answer some of the questions that we have. So I'll just go directly to it. First, a question for Dr. Youssef. What do you think about increasing the taxes and allocating those taxes for the healthcare system? So the money that we get from taxes into the healthcare system.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Randa. Actually, you know, to help actually people to quit smoking and to prevent or to reduce the prevalence of smoking, there is a need for complex interventions for targeting. We need to implement a variety of smoking or tobacco control strategies, you know, like mass reach health communication campaigns, taxing and increasing the unit price to reduce the affordability, and comprehensive smoke-free policies and other strategies. Honestly, actually, from reviewing the literature, I see that increasing tobacco taxes is one of the most effective strategy to help people to quit smoking. This ultimately will result in increase the prices of cigarettes and decreasing the affordability, especially when it comes for children and adolescents. And this is really a very effective strategy, is to use the taxes. You know, there is a misconception among the governments that if you need the taxes on cigarettes, the government revenue will decrease. Definitely, this is not true. Increasing the taxes will help people to quit smoking, and also will increase the revenue of the governments. And this revenue actually can be used to improve healthcare and health services for people. So I see it as the most effective strategy. Take money, reduce smoking, and use the money for the best of people.
Thank you, Dr. Youssef. We move on to our next question. Are there any specific successful examples of pioneer efforts related to anti-smoking in our region? I think maybe Dr. Fatima might know of such pioneer efforts in the region.
Thank you very much, Dr. Randa, for this question. This is a very important question, and I would change it not to pioneer, but successful. So we see successful examples in the region. We see success in Saudi Arabia. We see success in Bahrain in reducing the prevalence, because at the end of the day, what shows us the success is the rate of the prevalence. So we are seeing some countries reducing in prevalence in the coming years towards our target in the year 2030 of 30% reduction in tobacco use. These countries implemented comprehensive approach, maybe not all highest level policies, but comprehensive approach to tobacco control. And this is the key success: political commitment and comprehensive approach to tobacco control. Indeed, the efforts of Saudi Arabia in applying plain packaging is not seen anywhere else in the region. We do hope to see more countries taking these successful evidence-based policies forward as well to achieve similar results. But there are examples, of course, of tobacco-free cities, and this is a very big, good example, like tobacco-free World Cup in Qatar, for example, where everybody on the news is talking about tobacco-free World Cup. Everybody goes to Mecca, Medina, Sharjah in United Arab Emirates, and they speak about the three cities being tobacco-free. And we are working with other cities in the region, including Qom in Iran, to also become a tobacco-free city. So there are some innovative approaches, but the key element for success in tobacco control is a comprehensive approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fatima. We move on to a question. I think, Rebecca, we've discussed this before at some point, which is introducing some of these topics into the curricula of schools and universities.
Yes, absolutely. I think perhaps the best way to get students involved in this issue is to actually put them to work, for instance, doing mobilizations and activities, advocacy events, using their prowess in social media to spread the word, rather than lecturing them from the podium, actually getting them up and involved. So with mobilizations and activities, we've done this in a lot of countries, for instance, using young people to do die-ins or to use the power of social media to tell their friends, to do creative contests about what would help with anti-smoking work. And in this way, they get engaged and they learn. One thing about lecturing kids from a school platform, especially young people, very young people, is that the tobacco industry does this. And they do it because they actually know that it sets up this idea of like a forbidden fruit. Oh, I can't do that. At least I can't do it now. But when I get older, then I'll be able to. So you have to be really, really careful with your messaging and your audience. So if done carefully and correctly, it can be useful, but maybe better in the older age groups than the very young.
Thank you. Our next question is for Dr. Youssef. This is a question from Dr. Abdul Wahid. So do you, can you shed some light on the effectiveness maybe of using the religious messages on as an effective tobacco control strategy, especially in this region and in Muslim countries?
Thank you, Dr. Randa, and thanks to Dr. Abdul Wahid al-Sururi from Yemen. You know, all religions, not only Islam, all religions are concerned with the well-being of humans, including their health and therefore with the negative health impact of tobacco use. Tobacco use is a social problem, and its control requires really a real change in social beliefs and norms. One thing that has worked successfully in this regard throughout the centuries in the countries of the Eastern Mediterranean region is religion. Thus, whenever possible, a religious message should be activated at all different levels. Religion has the potential to play an important role in any comprehensive tobacco control strategy. This is in general, but you know, there is a scarcity of research, honestly, about the effect of religion or religious messages on tobacco control. And really the findings are conflicting. For example, one study I remember in Indonesia, actually they compared religious with non-religious messages. They did not really find a significant difference between them, but it does not mean that religious messages does not work. You know, the vast majority of the region are Muslims. You know, we can use the fatwa saying that tobacco is prohibited, and we see that many religious, at least religious people, will not smoke. We can guarantee this. To Dr. Abdul Wahab. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Youssef. I think this Ramadan proves opportune time to encourage people to stop smoking. Dr. Fatima, you have a comment.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Randa, and thank you very much, Dr. Khadr, for this very informative reply. I have three things to address, and I will be very quick. The first thing is that religious messages can work, but not alone. They need to be integrated within the different policies related to tobacco control. And at the same time, we can find the root for that in Article 12 of the WHO FCTC on raising awareness and communication messages related to the implementation of the convention. However, we have seen that the religious message is used haphazardly and not systematically. We have in WHO a series of publications that is called Health Through Faith, or the Right Path to Health, the Right Path to Health. And it addresses the different religious aspects of different health issues, but the fatwa comes out, it is used, and then people sleep on it. So it also needs regular activities and integrating it with the different messages that we are using for tobacco control. Nonetheless, it is very important to note that the tobacco industry is worried about the religious message. And there has been several articles, including in The Guardian, on the review of the activities of the industry in this regard, where they tried to undermine the fatwa because they were worried about it. They also, Randa, and thank you very much for highlighting this, noted the impact of the month of Ramadan on the smokers to raise their need to quit. So they were advising their agents in the Middle East to promote mild and light products during the month of Ramadan, so that the smokers are satisfied using it, and then after the Ramadan they will go back to their normal usage patterns. So it is very important to look at the issue comprehensively, not depend on one element and neglect the others, and at the same time continued and route for working with religion, and not only hit and run approach that will not lead to anything with any kind of tool. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fatima. And I would like to note that during our campaign in Iraq, we actually approached religious figures and religious entities not to broadcast a religious message, but to use their platforms to share the messages that we were campaigning within the country. And we used mass gatherings such as the Al-Ba'in pilgrimage in the country to also reach a large number of individuals. And I think this is part of being more comprehensive and taking the context of the country and religion into account. Okay, moving on to a next question. So, Dr. Youssef, you showed in one of the slides the picture of a Trojan horse. Which tactic are you specifically tackling or discussing when showing this Trojan horse?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to, by showing this image, to send a message that tobacco industry interference can come in many deceptive forms, actually. All tactics are mentioned, applies in this case, but the most important tactic, those I mentioned, is that, using the groups, the front groups, where they usually hidden, the group ties to the tobacco industry are usually hidden, but in this case, they can create illusion of public sympathy for certain issues related to smoking. So all tactics apply, but I see, to answer Dr. Marwiz, front groups is the one I meant by this image.
Thank you. Another question: are there any studies on the reasons why smoking is more prevalent in low-income countries?
I could try to answer that.
Yes, Rebecca.
I think it's more prevalent because there haven't been tobacco control measures put in place. So places like Australia have been tackling the industry for decades. They sort of started all of this back in the 1960s, and they've been tackling the industry and working to have policies in place, working to have FCTC and Empower-like policies in place. And that has changed things a lot, and they've had the money to do that. And so, for instance, in places like New Zealand, they're even talking about an end game for tobacco, which means if you're below a prevalence of below 10%, you're talking about a problem that really can be basically wiped out, as close to wiped out as you can get. So this is possible, and places even like New York have extremely low prevalence because we've been working since about 2000 to really push this issue. It has to be a priority. There has to be that political will, and you can get somewhere. But, in low and middle income, what happened was, as high income countries really worked on tobacco control and less people smoked, the industry went to low and middle income countries. And that's what we're seeing. So you really need to be putting in those comprehensive measures to fight the industry.
Thank you, Rebecca. Next question, or actually it's a comment. It's about increasing taxes. Our participant said that the argument of increasing illicit trade is a broken record that they keep hearing from government officials. And of course, this argument is fed by the industry. And actually, maybe we keep hearing the example of the prohibition of alcohol in the US and how it actually increased consumption. Does any of our speakers have any comment on that?
Yes, Dr. Randa, I can address this point, actually. Yeah. You are right. This is really an excuse that used by governments, because they are already lobbying with tobacco industry, that if we increase the tax, they will increase the smuggling and the illicit trade will be rich in the countries. This is to some extent true, but implementing this intervention, I mean increasing the taxes, should not be done alone by itself. There should be other work and efforts that target, smuggling and illicit trade. So this is not an excuse, something that can be done to reduce this, actually. And this is, I remember that when Jordan a few years ago wanted to increase the price or started to increasing the taxes, tobacco companies said, listen, now we will reduce the base price, to overcome what the government is planning to do, so that to keep the cost affordable. And they use this excuse, actually, this will increase the smuggling. But still, what we see in Jordan, that, the price is low, much lower than any other neighboring countries. The affordability is very high. That will attract new children and new customers and new consumers to start smoking.
Thank you, Dr. Yusuf. Dr. Fatima, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. This is a very overused argument by the tobacco industry, to be honest. And it is not only used in relation to taxes, but also when plain packaging is proposed in any country, they immediately flag the Smuggling, illicit trade will increase, etc. WHO report, I think it was the year 15, if I'm not mistaken, on the global tobacco epidemic focused on taxation. And they gave several examples, including in Spain, where Spain was the lowest country in this, the taxes level, while the other European countries were increasing their levels. And the highest level of smuggling was in Spain. After Spain was convinced that it has to raise taxes and strengthen their governance measures, they increased the taxes and they decreased the illicit tobacco trade. There are many examples, and I call upon the participants here to look at that publication. It is a very useful one. And also, I agree, of course, with Dr. Khadr that they keep on playing the games, reduce the minimum price, increase the... So it is endless. And what has to happen is that governments need to put their foot down and say, this is the policy that we are implementing, regardless of the many claims of the tobacco industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fatima. Which countries have the highest, and I think this is in reference to our region, which countries have the highest and lowest tobacco use, and what lessons can we learn from that?
I'm not going to answer this.
Dr. Yusuf, do you have any numbers?
About consumption?
Consumption in the region.
No, actually this estimate will not help, you know, because this is dependent on the population. So I can say that Egypt has the highest consumption. Maybe this is not an indicator to see the progress of the countries in the control of smoking. Better to look at the prevalence and even incidence, the number who start smoking actually maybe a better measure actually, but the consumption, you know, it depends on the population and the number of smokers in the country. You know, we have actually the World Bank report, the last one actually estimate the tobacco consumption, manufacturing, trading in all countries in the region.
If you allow me to add, Randa, the WHO report on the global tobacco epidemic that is released every 2 years has all the estimates from all the countries. So please have a look at it and you will see the numbers. I agree with Dr. Yusuf that definitely, for example, it is always said that we have the highest number of tobacco consumers, but also it is due to the size of the population of this region and the growth of population, the fast growth of population in the region. That is why it is always estimated that we will be increasing in numbers of smokers. So there are many elements that contribute to this. The fact that we have the highest number of smoking among young people 13 to 15 years old, and this is definitely attributed to other tobacco use, including water pipe. And we have very high prevalence among men, maybe the highest in the among the highest in the world. When you look at Jordan, and it is above 60, and the West Bank it is above 60, and this is the recent numbers coming from there. So definitely we have the highest numbers, and without strong policies and strong implementation, nothing will change. We will remain like this. So it is very important to look at the policy side very seriously. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, I have to conclude our very interesting session, although in Arabic or in Lebanese, we always say لا يمل. This has been a pleasurable talk, and I thank our speakers for all of their presentations and the work that they've been doing on tobacco. And I hope we continue our collaborations. And I apologize for our attendees. We weren't able to answer all of your questions, but I hope you have benefited from this session. Have a lovely evening and rest of the day, everyone. And until our next webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
so much
Thank
for
you so
having
much.
us.
Bye.